I will introduce our dramaturgy of this panel and then participants and interlocutors of mine. So this is some kind of dialogue between the researchers and commentators from this part of the stage. This is an open talk about research conducted in the Kultura Nova Foundation called Approaches to Participatory Governance of Cultural Institutions. So in the first part of our panel, we will have our three researchers, Anna Žuvela from Institute of Development and, other way around. Anna Žuvela from Institute of Development and International Relations, then Mirko Petrić from the Department of Sociology, University of Zadar, and Davor Mišković from Drugo organizations from Rijeka. They will introduce us the research. Davor will be the first who will open the context part. The Mirko, then Darko, and then Anna. And afterwards, Davor. Afterwards, we'll have a commenting part of this research and speech of our researchers. I will present you the other three of our panel. Teodor Celakoski from Operacija Grad Association of Civil Organizations, Irena Đokić from Institute of Economics from Zagreb, and Professor Vjeran Katunarić from University of Zadar. So Mirko, you have the stage now. Yes, that one, or the one here.
Hello everyone. I would like to say first a couple of things about what I would like to say in the short time that I have. I would like to speak about my personal motivations to participate in these projects, just for fear not to make some mistake, because this is pardon? Okay, I'm notorious for not being able to handle a mic. So I would like actually to start with some of the reasons that made me and also my colleagues, if I can speak on their behalf, to participate in this project, for fear of not saying anything wrong, unofficially, so to speak, because this is of course an official project by Zaklada Kultura Nova, funded by UNESCO and whatnot. So I considered it safest if I tell you my reasons, and these reasons I'm sure will be shared by many of the people who participate in the process. I am going to show you a couple of slides, but first I'm going to say again that the title of this project is Approaches to Participatory Governance. This is something that we've been dealing with for these 3 days. We have, and we will for tomorrow as well, of cultural institutions. Now, why participatory, why governance, and why cultural institutions? And also, not unimportant, why in Croatia? Why was it that we got the motivation and the idea to apply for the project and to work on it and enjoy each other's research company and whatnot. We are, all of us here, not just researchers, if I can say this, but try to participate in civil society actions, contribute to the public sphere and whatnot. So we see it as doubly challenging. We see it as challenging as researchers and also as people who think of themselves, and I hope I can speak, like engaged citizens. So before I give you a little bit of the context, I want to show you some slides. These slides are from the city of... Is it working? It's okay? Okay, so these slides are from the city of Split, in which I happen to live, but they are not... Okay, speak into the mic, okay? One has to... this one. Okay, mobile, great. So, not working. I told you, I warned you. Microphones and myself, we just don't fit together well. Anyway, this is something that comes from the city of Split on the Adriatic coast. City of Split is part of our research. We are going to talk about it, but this is more for illustrative reasons. This is a building, unfinished building, like the modernities were unfinished in our part of the world, called the Youth House. It was started in the the beginning of the construction of this object started in the late 70s, and it hasn't been finished ever. But there were lots of people doing work on this and making it accessible to people and ready for use, and it is being used by civil society organizations, but it's unfinished. What I want you to see, what you want to take a note of, is the size of this building. This is what in late socialism, somebody who was investing in youth, had the idea of how much they should have. Theater halls inside, studio, TV, and whatnot. This shows the location of this youth house on the peninsula of Split. It is a green dot in the middle, is the youth house. And you see behind it lots of white space. These are all new residential developments. These are apartments and apartments and apartments going on forever, and there's only a couple of red dots which are libraries usually as cultural institutions, and this green space which was supposed to be a performance venue, library, and many other things, theater and whatnot. So this was the situation in the 70s, and pretty much now. All the constitutions, as you see, are concentrated around the harbor, around the Diocletian's palace, around the historic core of the city. This is where they are, and this is the only thing sticking out. This is the situation in the 1990s, and I thank Miranda Veljačić, who is very much engaged in Youth House platform, for this depiction of all this. The green dots here are churches that were planned to be built in the post-socialist transition in Split. So you see, what you have is cultural institutions in the center, a youth house, and all the planned churches. They were not all completed, but this was the plan. And something that was completed was shopping malls. These are now the locations of the shopping malls in Split, around the city and one in the middle, basically. And these shopping malls suck the space, so to speak, into themselves, and they do not contribute to urban living, and there are just simply no cultural institutions on the majority of this space. This is also, I would like to see, this is funding from 3 years, 2012, 13, and 14. And you see in the first column is the total budget of the city Split. The second column is culture in the budget. Then institutional culture, meaning theaters and whatnot. And then you see something called independent culture, or rather you don't see it quite well because there's almost nothing there. And then when you see the redistribution of this is just the civil society associations, and you see for 3 years how much money they get, and then you see platform of the youth house. And it was a little red dot, and now it's greener. It's a little bit bigger. So this is what I wanted you. This is what I wanted you to see before we continue, because this is what can explain some of the reasons, some of the motivations that are behind this project. Our context in this country is such that in the late 70s, let's say, during the 1980s, the final decades of what was known as self-managing socialism, we had a sort of flowering of culture with lots of investment, and also, as Milena Dragičević was saying yesterday, for some 10 years, a lot of self-governance of cultural institutions. The system later got bureaucratized and dysfunctional in many ways, and then what ensued was the breakup of Yugoslavia, the war, the so-called post-socialist transition, and the first 5, 6, 7, 8 at least years of transition in the 1990s were very unpleasant period for independent cultural initiative of any source. There was homogenization caused by war. There was really rampant nationalism. But around 1997, 1998, things stabilized a little bit, and at that time, some people, one of them is here, Professor Katunarić, wrote this very well-received a report on the Croatian culture for Council of Europe, 1998, and then afterwards, immediately at the beginning of the 21st century, there was National Strategy for Culture. These two documents, if I may interpret this, synthesized what was best in the actually preceding period, in the pre-war period, as some sort of a platform for the future of culture. But unfortunately, in the period that ensued, and which we are still part of, there was, somebody was speaking about tyranny of participation, tyranny of the private, we could say, ensued. In addition to nationalism and whatnot, there was a neoliberal commercial pressures, and especially privatizations of various sorts, privatizations of space. Space is very important in this story. Physical space in the cities, like Cvjetni Square, Flower Square in the city of Zagreb, which became a focal because it was made so, with some illegal construction there, or semi-legal, or I don't know even how to explain it, really channeled the citizen protest movement to that spot and some other spots in the city, and the movement was called, the initiative was called the Right to the City. So this is also one of the motivating factors, was this space, city space, the right to space, and also the visibility and democratic participation of citizens, which were deprived of that kind of participation in that period and still in some aspect now. The second thing is an emphasis on what was known in this independent culture scene as open institutions. Why open institutions? Because Croatia actually funded culture quite generously in the period, in some respects, compared with some other countries, but following the principle of what could be described as historical funding. So meaning institutions which were in place were getting all the money. Croatian National Theatre 1, Croatian National Theatre 2, Croatian 5 theatres in the country, they were getting money, money for exhibitions, for things like this. The culture, independent culture or youth culture, alternative culture, it was known before, was very, very, very underfunded, and it is still very underfunded up to these days. And this is where a number of coalitions started in different cities in Croatia, starting from Zagreb, that insisted on something that is also interesting as a term, because people are kind of surprised with it, because there is a lot of talk about private-public partnership these days, but there was the idea of civil-public partnership, meaning civil associations with public authorities, and the idea was to produce these open institutions. And there was, I must say, quite a lot of success, and quite a lot of visibility was gained by these associations. What we wanted to do now is prepare for the next step, meaning to research what there exists, what kind of practices exist in these youth centers in the country, in a country which is very diverse, in a country in which at one point the capital city's budget for culture was higher than the national budget for culture, in a country which is not decentralized really, in which some cities are really suffering a lot, in country where there are small cities which have their own projects. So we wanted to see what it looked like in a diversity of various cities. Speaking of Adriatic coast, commercial pressures coming with tourism, of course, deindustrialization in most of the country. In small cities, you know, some are too small. The smallness kind of enables them to do things that otherwise they couldn't, but also smallness is limited in some ways. So we wanted to research the diversity of practices, strategies that appear in these contexts. And we also wanted to see it, and Anna is going to tell you more about it, how it is it that other people do it, how it is done, quotation marks, abroad, in different contexts, in different settings, and maybe use this experience to advance our practices, but also maybe when we put this all together, offer this as a corrective or as a something that to be discussed with about to other people. The key word it proved out, and I'm finishing with this sentence, the key term proved to be context. We seem to have understood that it is context determines very much not only the situation and constellations in a particular city, in a particular community, but also strategies and practices that come about in this particular thing. As Professor Fischer said yesterday, if conditions are right, don't do it. Are not right, don't do it. We were sort of checking if the conditions were right, and we want to do it regardless of the fact if they are right. We really want to do it together to try to sort of improve the practices that we are currently mapping in these places. And our results indicate that there are lots of diverse practices, and there are some commonalities and differences about which, depending on the context, about which Davor will tell you more. Thank you.
It's my turn. Okay. Thank you, Mirko, for giving us such a broad context. And I will try to go, I mean, for people from Croatia, that will be probably something that they heard already for, I don't know, several dozens of times. But I will try to describe your situation with this independent cultural scene that Mirko just described, just mentioned, and how it comes to the idea of developing social cultural centers. That is a kind of topic of our research. And I'm here in kind of peculiar situation that I'm both researcher and kind of actor in these processes. But I mean, that's the. I can't escape from that two roles in that sense. What I want to say is that, I mean, these initiatives for development of social cultural centers in Croatia have many similarities, these initiatives in several cities in Croatia. But, I mean, they are initiated by quite different actors and in a different contexts. We can say that they are originated through a kind of long process of getting along and convergence of interests of organizations that are part of these initiatives. These initiatives are mainly consisted of NGOs, artistic organizations, and also firms that are operating on the principles of social entrepreneurship. And they are dealing they are all dealing with some sort of cultural production in kind of quite wide range, from kind of elite culture to the street art. But they are also dealing with activism, social entrepreneurship, civil society development, with organization of leisure time of young people, with services in culture, and so on. I mean, differences among these organizations and initiatives are kind of related to their field of work, while their links, connections are related to, I would say, several basic values, because all of them are somehow devoted to the development of certain model of participatory governance of resources. Their activities are always oriented toward the social development and not to kind of appropriation. They are open to intersectoral work. Autonomy of work is highly respected, as well as aesthetic and ethical positions. And these are kind of, I would say, this is my opinion, this is a kind of this sharing of these basic principles is something that constitute what we call independent culture scene. I mean, independent culture scene in Croatia established itself as a category in a kind of cultural policies. This independent scene has kind of now, I would say, in several past years, is directed its own activities to the institutionalization of its position, creating a kind of identifiable space for its ongoing activities. Of course, cultural output is a basic activity of the independent scene. However, its diversity of it makes this recognition as an entity quite difficult. What leads a society, I would say, what leads society to recognize cultural production are its aesthetic qualities, or the medium in which such production is being expressed, and the values established in its artistic activity or cultural activity. Consequently, it's all about what dominant kind of discourse of kind of artistic expression deals with. I mean, kind of artistic, formulating artistic fields and so on. And this is not kind of discourse of independent culture scene in Croatia. For this reason, the independent scene has been recognized as an entity, I would say, mainly in the field of cultural policy. Since in that field, the basic principles that is guiding its operations are recognized. While the general public is recognizing kind of protagonists of the independent scene, primarily due to their contribution to the aesthetic dimension, and they are not recognizing scene as a whole, while that's happening in the field of, from the perspective of cultural policy. What matters for the existence of kind of any entity in a society is a kind of its physical manifestations, the space it occupies in a kind of public realm. The independent scene is active today in spaces that are quite diverse as the programs it implements. The programs are largely brought to live in spaces belonging to traditional cultural institutions such as museums, theaters, galleries, or use is made of public spaces, squares, streets, abandoned factories, and so on. All these spaces are recognized for some other qualities and not due to the independent scene programs. Therefore, already for some years, a powerful initiative, I would say very powerful initiative, is being launched to create an environment for independent cultural scene, a space that would concretize the existence of the independent scene. And I would say that this is a kind of process that is going on for several years in Croatia right now. That space should kind of should enable expression of independent cultural scenes, fundamental functional principles, its participative management, cooperative creativity, interdisciplinary approach, reaction to social and cultural processes, initiation of change, and kind of dealing with the It's too long already? Okay. Organizations that are part of independent cultural scene started to create programs on its own, and those programs were kind of reflection of their interests as well as of the needs of local communities. With time, they developed their capacities to manage projects, programs, and advocacy activities. So this is kind of historical kind of development process in parallel to kind of to develop its own capacities. Those organizations also develop mutual cooperation. And this is yesterday we had a presentation of Kultura Network that kind of were one of the main facilitator of this process of learning how to cooperate in the field of independent cultural scenes. I would say that most of the activities that independent culture scene was doing 15 years ago were held in spaces which physical characteristics was completely inadequate. So somehow there was a need to work in a more appropriate spaces, and also there was a need to mark its presence in society. Somehow that two needs were leading to creation of alliances and joint actions. And where they succeeded to create such spaces, they developed a model of participatory management of the space, but also of other resources. And I would say that model has shown its qualities. It succeeded to secure space from privatization. All of these spaces are open for a number of users, beside those who are members of these alliances, and they are operating for the benefit of community. Today, those initiatives are trying to create stability of those spaces through a model of civil-public partnership that Mirko just mentioned, and to institutionalize their practices in a form of something that we call now social cultural centers. And I would say that to link this to yesterday's Frank Fisher's lecture, that these bottom-up initiatives somehow were linked to the framework that is created from above, in a way. Because, to be more precise, to the crack in a present cultural system. Somehow, crisis of cultural institution had opened a space for different types of regulations of relationship between citizens, public authorities, and public resources. It has opened a space for creation of new types of institutions. And that doesn't mean that demand for institutional isomorphism has vanished. It is not, but it's not strict as it was before. And this opportunity for creation of institutions that will have goals, structure, and management model different from other present institutions in cultural sector was used in Zagreb, where Alliance Operation City, that have more than 30 members, mainly NGOs from cultural field, in partnership with the city of Zagreb, has created Pogon, a new type of cultural institution in Croatia. Pogon is managing the venues and other resources of its own resources in a manner that is somehow not comparable with other cultural institutions. It has created a model of participatory governance that led to its different position in a cultural system. I would say that instead to be a node in a system of cultural institution, it becomes a hub for independent cultural scene. Of course, to be exception in any situation is not simple, because it's raising a question about the nature of kind of normal ones, and it is always disturbing. Regular institution and culture system itself do not like challenges, to be faced with something that is questioning their structure, procedures, management style, and role in community. I would say, however, in spite of that, Pogon survived, and it is now a role model for several other initiatives in Croatia. Situations in other cities that we are researching are similar to that one in Zagreb, but on a completely different scale and in a different phase of development. We as researchers have in mind the differences, but we put on a focus on a process of establishing alliances and habits of participatory governance. And if I have some more time, I would like just to concentrate on something that is really my personal interest in that research, but which I think somehow we're sharing this. And this is a situation how it will function, these socio-cultural scenes, when they will be established in Croatia, hopefully. I would say that one of the issues that all these initiatives are dealing is a kind of solidarity. And I would say that solidarity in the independent scene somehow is based in terms of status, its unprivileged position in relation to the public sector in culture, as well as its constant struggle to create better conditions. Those factors in terms of status and constant struggle manage to create a sense of unity in the divergent population in the divergent population, and to create kind of accumulation of cultural associations. So I would say, for the other hand, that communication within the scene, it's quite reduced to an exchange related to the struggle for position in terms of status or against privatization of public assets that is a value that is mutually shared on that scene. This solidarity is maintained by the existence of external enemy and is based on the risk of destruction of its own existence and of destruction of the values, of the basic values shared by all in that scene. In this communication process, individual actors on the scene remain kind of external to one another. As soon as the struggle ends, they remain concentrated on themselves or to the subgroups which they are shared the majority of their values. In fact, they do not become connected as a whole, but somehow they are creating they are connected through these values, and they are not sharing especially aesthetic values, I will say, that are not shared commonly among this scene. These aesthetic values are largely are important, but it's not exclusively that could create a problem among them. Also, I would say that exceptionally important is the business model. For example, whether market logic or public system integration will prevail in this respect. To that extent, the space of independent culture represents a far larger challenge than locating diverse program and complex operation model in particular premises. It would be good that such facility becomes a place of solidarity for its members. I mean, participation of the users in the operation would be the first step in that direction. Initiatives supporting establishing of such spaces have defined them as socio-cultural centers that are managed by some sort of participatory model. Actors who, together with public authorities bodies, are founders of such centers should delegate representatives in the management bodies that decide on investments, programs, financial plans, and other operational issues. However, as this space is a place of coming together of divergent practices, the question arises as to how such diverse users would be able to articulate a unique interest, to create a profile of the space. Values for which the independent scene stands homogeneously are the political ones, while its activity is cultural, with inherent differences and competitive relations. What would make these centers recognizable to the broad public, to society as a whole? I would say surely not participative managing model, since despite how worthy it is, it does not represent an identifiable space profile. To this end, the independent scene needs to find a solution that would define the profile of such spaces by virtue of their content. And I would say that it's finding it. I would say that divergent practices pertaining to diverse media and aesthetics orientations are not grounds for finding a connecting point. The point is found on a kind of on a broader social level. This is why these spaces are primarily defined as environments of sociability, places in which the social context transforms into cultural content. Their profile is set by their active relationship toward social processes. That is why their spatial organization cannot be based on the Cartesian model of separating subject and objects, as it is the case in theaters and galleries. They are primarily organized as spaces in terms of discourses. They are located on a physical localities and are defined by them to a certain extent, but not fully. Nevertheless, the sociability factors thus situated them in especially limited but not static communities. They are unable to disconnect from the space in which they dwell and cannot separate from the community in which they are active. They are connected with the space through diverse forms of communication and documentation, artistic works, text, activism, and entrepreneurship. Their working model looks more like an itinerary than a map, which differentiates them essentially from the other cultural institutions that initially map out all the important events in their field. Unlike a map that gives a realistic image of certain area, itineraries give the subjective view of the same reality. In the case of sociocultural centers, that means that they look at things from the point of view of the community in which they carry out their activities, trying to find the answers to the questions as to where we are heading as a community, how we are going to reach that destination, and how long is the journey going to take. They create a narrative made up of fragmental sequences of events and actions that take place in the space. The community embeds into this narrative its hopes and fears, interests and needs. Sociocultural centers are discourse environments in which meaning is created by statements, symbols and actions, constructs whose elements are not fixed but transitive, following one another depending on alternations in the context in which they are active. And this very context is which they are active represents their content. This is coming to the end.
Like third program of the...
third radio program. Yeah, I would say that what I'm, as a researcher, interested is something that we learned from American pragmatists, that habit is an individual performance of common pattern of behavior. Habits are produced and confirmed in practice through interaction and communication with others. So they are never individual, but are formed only on the basis of social behavior and joint activity. Individual performance is determined not only by social interactions, but also by previous performances. So what I would like to grasp in our research is how the habit of participatory governance is taking place in 7 different locations in Croatia, those locations that are not standalone, but are connected to each other, to their local context and international practices.
Thank you, Davor. Is this working? Yeah, okay. So after my colleagues, researchers provided us with a very juicy, if I may say that way, contextual and conceptual elaboration, it's my turn to provide you with the dry bits, or the bone, or how we did it. So I'm just going to offer a couple of slides to take you through the path on how we sort of progressed in this research, which tools did we take. Yeah, this works. Davor and Mirko touched upon what was our interest in the matter. The basic focus of the research in that entire contextual cloud that was now explained was the existing and emerging models of innovative culture institutions arising from the shared creative spaces and based on the principles of participatory governance. So our idea was to see and detect where are these new models of institutions, what is happening there, and what kind of participation is going on. What was really important for us is to focus on the involvement of relevant stakeholders. I mean, first to detect who are the stakeholders that are included in the process, and found that predominantly those were local authorities, civil society organizations, or non-governmental organizations, artists, culture workers, and local community. And if all of us can remember the lecture yesterday from Professor Frank Fischer, this really sort of resonates with the idea of governance already, like including different stakeholders in creating new sort of arrangements in managing or governing resources, those being spatial, those being human resources, finances, and even programming. What in this setup of multi-stakeholder governance based on the principles of participation, what was really important to understand and research were the levels and extents of their representation. How do they interact? How are they juxtaposed? What are the levels of inclusivity between different stakeholders? And what type of access is available to the decision-making positions and processes as one of the crucial questions. Who decides? How are they deciding? And on what basis are they included in the decision-making processes? Research method, I'm going to do this really quickly. In many respects, again, going back to Professor Fischer's lecture of last night, it resonates with the backdrop of the deliberative policy analysis. So we didn't move in as an expert that explained through our complex methodology on what is going on here, but we first sort of sensed out these local situations and then adopted the methodology that was adequate to the situation rather than vice versa. What we used was the interpretative case study because we wanted to gain as much in-depth knowledge and understanding of these practices as possible. So this sort of seemed as best methodological approach to take. We combined it with the illustrative approach in investigating the new attributes and meanings of decentralization tendencies. Why decentralization? Because decentralization is one of the very important aspects, not only in investigating culture policy per se, but because we were on several different locations, examining the territorial aspects of decentralization, and B, of the power devolution as one of the most important aspects. Our study and our research was very exploratory and instrumentally purposed. So we knew why we are doing this. We weren't doing it on our own accord because we have, as they say, subjective and objective sort of wishes and desires to pursue this topic, but because there was an evident need to research the transformations that were happening in the cultural field of Croatia to provide arguments for further action. Scope, we went to 7 different cities where we found, according to the criteria that was established, the practices that were, ripe enough to be researched. And these 7 cities were Dubrovnik, Čakovec, Karlovac, Pula, Rijeka, Split and Zagreb. But Dubrovnik is not written first because I'm from Dubrovnik, it's because of the alphabetical order. And the temporal span of the research was from 2000 onwards till today. Why since 2000? Because these were as Davor said, these are the years of late 90s and beginning of 2000 where we actually get the coherent contours of what Croatian culture policy field was. And these were the times of the post-war, structural changes in the culture field that actually enabled these changes to start happening. Our research team was made of 4 national members and 1 international members. So we were set up with Nancy Duxbury from originally Canada, from University of Coimbra in Portugal. Nancy she's not here with us, I don't think, I can't see. She's not here, right? She's an expert on cultural sustainability, which is a topic of an extreme importance for this line of research and for cultural mapping. Davor Mišković, he introduced himself. Mirko, you know. Leda, I think Leda's around here. She's a young researcher. And myself. And we had a tremendous support from, and I used the opportunity to thank Kultura Nova for this, from the office team, from the governance structure, and from the entire environment where we were situated, our research. We didn't set out to research this with any of the set hypotheses. We didn't make any assumptions. We didn't say social culture centers based on participatory governance are the best models for transforming institutional landscape in culture in Croatia. We went in with a set of research questions that sort of tackled, we could possibly divide it into 2 main categories: the external factors and internal factors of approach how to assess these practices. Some of them, there were quite a few more, are written here, and they deal with assessing what are the levels of decentralization and sharing of authority in cultural policy decision-making in Croatia, what are the examples of participatory governance in Croatia. So we went back to the instances of changes in legislation that brought cultural councils, which was one of the most profound shifts in culture policy in Croatia at the beginnings of 2000, that continued with the foundation of HAVC, of the Croatian Audiovisual Center, then with Foundation Kultura Nova, then we came to Pogon. So there were different steps of development of the devolution of authority in a Croatian culture policy system. We then wanted to figure out what are the roles of regional, local, and municipal authorities and cultural actors in enabling or constraining new models of participatory governances. Again, to go back to Professor Fischer's lecture yesterday, you have to have this sort of two-way communication to establish participation. If it goes one way, then it ends up in frustration. So we wanted to see where are these dynamics best positions, and how do these new participatory models that are existing or are emerging sort of influencing the trends of sustainability in the local culture developments. Our overall aim was to assess the distinct elements and characteristics of new and emerging governments and institutional formats in culture based on participatory governance design and the interrelation to culture policy changes on national and subnational level. Now, although now here we're talking about national and subnational levels, which my colleagues explained, these entire changes from the forms of governance, from shift from government to government, from centralization to decentralized network, from the focus on city, from cities becoming in crisis, from democracy going into crisis, is not something that was a Croatian specificity. Our entire theoretical framework, and actually framework of reference, including that was influenced by the global situation, where these changes are also happening. The specificity of our case was the post-transitional context and the situation. But many of the instances that we were researching found their echo in international examples and international situation. The objectives were quite straightforward, like describing what is the state of art in the dominant practice of cultural policy, so researching the progression of our cultural policy, which is, as we all know, unwritten document since the document in 1998 and the subsequent one from 2003. The strategy, we still don't have the coherent national document on Croatian policy or strategy, but hopefully we will have one soon. We wanted to recognize what Davor was talking about, the values of new and emerging social cultural centers. We wanted to establish what kind of venues are used, what kind of resources are involved, and to distinguish the meanings and practices of participatory governance and civil public partnerships. Why meanings? Because participatory governance is not a practice or a method or a principle that has a unified or universal meaning. It's very contextual, very local, and there are different understandings of how it adapts to different situations. Research progress, we can I think introduce two main stages. The first one was the one where we had a lot of meetings, we were sitting down a lot, devising how to approach this, how to tackle this. We were creating rationales, we were setting up questions, objectives, detecting locations, and creating questions, devising time span of how this research is going to happen. And then in the second stage, we started with the implementations. First, we produced city profiles for all 7 locations. So all of us researchers, we were divided according to different cities, and we made these documents with really in-depth and elaborate information on what is happening in every location. Political infrastructure, cultural infrastructure, media, education, tourism, main lines of commerce. You can fill me up. I can't even remember all the categories that we covered. Then we went into these cities. We had interviews in all 7 locations on 3 levels. So we interviewed the representatives of the civil sector and culture sector that was connected or had some kind of interest in these emerging practices. We interviewed the decision makers and policy makers, which encompasses the politicians and city administrators, and we conducted surveys with the members of the local community to see what kind of backbone do these practices have with the actual citizens. As I said, a lot of this was influenced not only with our legacy or with our current situation, but with an international environment and changes that are happening. So we wanted to see what are the practices of examples of similar practices internationally. And for this, we conducted an online survey or mapping exercise, which was devised by our colleague Nancy Duxbury, which was then now is being in a progress to be devised as an online resource of similar new institutional frameworks around Europe and internationally. But those also examples in the mapping were researched on the same basis as the national one. So there were easy comparative lines between us and them. And additional project activities included the capacity building in all 7 cities. So for all those 3 groups that I already mentioned, there was organized training, experience and knowledge sharing through different coaching sessions where we included our international experts, Piet Forget, who's the head of Department of Culture in the Belgian city of Leuven, Leuven city has already 3 really interesting cases of new models of institution based on participatory governance. Jaap Schafour, who's the director of the Broodplaatsen department, or Department for Breeding Spaces in the city of Amsterdam, where this municipal office is providing spaces for civil society and independent artists, but not only providing spaces, but playing this really interesting game of securing spatial resources before the force of tourism, which is quite powerful in the city of Amsterdam, and Leventa Poljak, who I think everybody now already knows, who's been with us now for 3 or 4 days, a colleague from Hungary, who's researching shared creative spaces all around Europe. Additionally, Kultura Nova set up a working group made of national practitioners who are following different sort of stages and levels of our research and then sending it back into the civil society sector so that this research was not isolated from the practice that was informing it. And finally, this international conference that we are at now is one project activity where we are presenting our interim process, but also sort of throwing everything that was found so far out against the sort of wider audience to get more information and to get sort of even inspiration and knowledge for our final steps of the project. And the final steps are, in 2018, as they are announced already at the beginning of this conference, Zaklada Kultura Nova will, with the international partner, publish scholarly academic publication on the topic, which will be edited by Davor and Nancy Duxbury. So that will be the academic level of the project. On a more practical level, we will publish policy provision paper, which will function like a manual for new and emerging practices of participatory governance in culture for local governments, national government, practitioners, civil society actors that will provide information on how to approach this, how to tackle this, how to do it, and inform the entire process. The online resource of international practices that are mentioned will be available online. We hope that we will not only get funding, but that we will still have even more researchers join us in continuing working on this topic, and then all of this work will contribute towards initiations for much needed cultural policy change in Croatia. And I think that would be it for me, Mario.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to representatives of our research team for this introduction to the research process and to the project. Before we start with the comments of our participants, I owe you apologize from a participant that was announced in the program, Mare Mrdiljaš, who sends his regards and apologies, but he had some other engagements that couldn't be postponed, so he could be with us today. I will start with the Professor Katunarić question and ask to give us some kind of sociological comments on these emerging new models of institutional practices and participatory practices of organizing in the institutions in terms of complexes of the context of post-transitional societies, in terms of deficit of democracy, failed promises about cultural democracy fulfillment, dominance of consumption or consumption culture, and dominance of tourism as a primary industry and part of the economy in Croatia. Please.
It's all right. Yeah. Thank you for giving me the floor. And what you ask about, what you expect from me is maybe too much, you know. And time is very short. So let me just give or express some thoughts related to what I was hearing about the speakers, presenters, our presenters, panelists. Well, it's a very impressive review of the situation in Croatia as regards cultural development, and especially what you can do in terms of research Why? Because researchers in this particular field are not only analysts. It is not just an analytic effort. It is also an engagement which our colleague from India very interesting described it yesterday. One must have some empathy for people when working with them. This is something which completely lacks in bureaucratic sector. Why I am speaking about bureaucracy in this way, in this particular moment, so to speak, is that I was having the opportunity to deal with culture policy on its official level, and let me try to explain what I want to say is to paraphrase my colleague and friend. We used to work together on the policy project on Croatia. His name is Charles Landry. Some of you perhaps met him before. He said that culture policy is not a debate about art forms. Well, then he stopped. He didn't say what he implicates with this statement. It's obviously, he wanted to say that the culture policy is ultimately about politics, about power, and how to share it. Well, this is the crux of your research project. I would say participatory democracy, culture participation in terms of democracy is by analogy also about politics. Yeah. And let me try to connect, to make some link between, to find some bottom line in all three speeches. To me, it is that, well, we changed context the last 30, 40 years as far as cultural policies are concerned. We started from 1970s, as Mirko showed on the first slide. That was the era when Croatia and the rest of Yugoslavia enjoyed a kind of cultural system policy, which was eventually affluent in terms of funding. You may ask anybody from that particular generation of artists, cultural workers, well, even Minister Mišković, which I was having the opportunity to work with, he was one of the head of these self-governmental interest communities, and he admitted, he confessed that they have never such a lot of money as they did have in 70s, the 80s. Why? Well, it is mostly because the party in power was having culture on the first place in the agenda. This is a very interesting. Culture was very, very important for the cultural Communist Party at that time. Why? This is another and pretty long story. Okay, now we have a war, and now we have another context, post-communist and very conflict societal and political context. When we describe it in terms of official and unofficial culture, of course it is the period of 90s, which is predominantly sealed, I would say, by the figure of George Soros. I was working with, not with him directly, but with the Open Society Institute. I was chairing a committee for centers of social creativity, and there was a lot of money there as well. Also in the state, which was defined as a state of Croatian people, you know, these perplextions about what is constitutional in Croatia, which state is that? But it was invested a lot of money on this ceremonial culture, this, you know, identity components of the new Croatian government, new Croatian state. And thereafter, we have a third period where Soros Foundation went from Croatia, and a kind of peaceful coexistence is restored between official policy and NGOs and independent scene. One of the evidences for that is the existence of this splendid organization as Kultura Nova. It is something completely new, not in terms of course, Monty Python's, but in a positive sense, something completely new in Croatia. Why? My first impression when I was, in a way, speaking with people from the NGO scene is unlike the first impression in the official culture policy, which was bureaucracy, power, hierarchy, and fear, and everything which accompanies the centralistic power, which is power over. It is too much. It is inefficient. It is irrational. It is, overburdening everybody. So it must be decentralized. As Anna said, well, it must be devolved. It must be given to others. Okay, my first impression when speaking with people and when seeing what they do in terms of NGOs and this independent scene was spontaneity and openness. Well, this was my first impression. We still don't have, as far as I know, you may correct me if I'm wrong, no critical analysis of what is going on within the NGOs, within these organizations. All what we have these days, and this is of course a normal way of representing an organization, is normative level. Okay, what is going inside? What is it within the black box? What is going on? Well, it is not idyllic, and we shouldn't romanticize anybody, including ourselves. I mean, people who either sympathize with the third sector, conditionally speaking, or third sector members itself. So let me finish with one short comment on what Anna and I was having the opportunity. I mean, a privilege that she gave me her paper in advance. So thank you very much once again. And what was really impressive in your part of speech, it was about. It was written also on the slides about the so-called relevant stakeholders. And if you look at what you listed as relevant stakeholders, I will quote you: public authorities and bodies, civil society organizations and NGOs, artists, cultural workers, creative industries, and local community representatives. Moreover, you said on page 11 of your paper, well, it is not published, but it is relevant which page, but just to remind you, you said that empowered participatory governance relies upon, well, this is a citation from another source, Fang and Wright. Listen to this: upon the commitment and capacities of ordinary people. Wow. Of ordinary people to make sensible decisions. Well, for us who are university professors, and for sometimes our experts, for sometimes we want to discuss with ordinary people, it's quite tricky. This is the major epochal. This sounds so much in terms of enlightenment that I'm impressed with such a vocation. That someone can empower ordinary people to speak with you in terms of communicative action, of Habermas, which is very much demanding, I would say. So what about, how do you, well, I was trying to speak about with ordinary, so-called ordinary people, don't take this amiss. I mean, I'm not I don't want to offend anyone. I mean, we are all ordinary people in this or in other way. it's very, those people who are not informed about culture and or specific issues are they think in binary oppositions, and it is black and white. And how you will color this vision of the world, of culture, of politics. It is a big question. It is a very challenging task. It is a task for all of us if we want to have a real democracy. In other words, real democracy is to empower, as you said, ordinary people to know how to express or how to deliberate, how to argue about their own attitudes. If they don't do that, if they cannot do that, they what? Then they give their voice through social networks for Trump. This is undemocratic, layer in the first country of democracy, which helped today that we consider the United States not as a democracy, but post-democracy. But this is another long story. Okay. Sorry for taking too much time. I will not speak again, so, well.
Okay. Thank you, Professor, for your comment. I will go back on some of the issues you opened in discussions, and of course, Anna. Now, after this analytical part and after the presentation of research, let's take another step forward in terms of the policies. I would like to ask Teodor Celakoski to somehow anticipate what kind of policies should be respond for these concepts of new institutions or participatory organization.
Policies or
Policies. But you can combine, of course. You can combine that, of course.
No. I'm
the right person.
Poesis.
No.
Poetics.
That one, no.
Okay.
Sorry, please.
Definitely there are several options, or maybe we can say challenges somehow in front of us. Are we going to, and how we will develop the whole thing as a, let's say, as a community or as a society with our governments and local governments and national governments. So in that sense, I see this as a, let's say, kind of progressing dynamic, definitely. But first of all, there are some things upon the development on the civil society part of the job to be done, and somehow it was like last 7 years we were pushing a lot energy and resources on different scales, finding different money resources and involving a lot of energy into the process of on these different locations to gather people to work together. So it's not, immediate. Like people tend not to see their interest behind their immediate interest. So if some organization have some interest in culture or artistic production, they are, because of the scarcity of resources and stuff like that, they not tend to think about building a framework for their work, but they go the short way, or because this is a powerless situation, and then somehow with lack of these resources, they stick to, let's say, doing individual type of approach to the system, So part of the process was together how to learn that being together in some demands that are not fulfilling your immediate needs could provide framework for your specific needs, but also for something else that have a wider, let's say, framework of thinking about the culture policy or how things should function. So in that sense, a lot of process in last years were involved a lot of energy was involved in process where people were stimulated to collaborate. So taking this collaboration as a granted, or that this is normal, or people from other countries saying, okay, it's easy with you because you have, I don't know, you have support, you have National Foundation for Civil Society Development, you have not understanding that this was also a part of the process of building these institutions and growing demand towards the building of these institutions in a way of not wanting only give us money or give us space or so. In that sense, in some of the locations, these processes were advanced, and they tend to dissolve themselves in a period of time if there is no stimulation, inner energy to, so important people within the groups who instigate the processes and stick to the processes are crucial for this. So in that sense, collective processes very much depends also in different locations on specific people who are stick to the common goal. Because you easily are pulled back into the process of surviving or your basic, dealing with your basic production or whatever. And there are fluctuation of the people and all this stuff. So in a such a, let's say, fragmented environment as a civil society, even organized civil society is, this is kind of demand, and this shouldn't be taken for granted. And on the other side, the process was also building understanding that the public domain is not enemy. So that the public culture institutions or the public culture framework is not enemy, but basically people could understand that, you know, huge infrastructure from their perspective is something what is kind of situation to fight. Okay, you should get less, like public institutions, and we should get more, you know. Even from private sector, this type of private culture initiatives, there were naturally this type of, let's say, demands. So the second step was to bring into the process the understanding of the public and division between private, civic, and public. That in the culture system we need diversity in that sense, and that we need somehow not preservation but securing existence of public sector. So we shouldn't be the argument for dissolving the public institutions, like making huge campaigns, because we can afford money for spending of killing some level of governance. So we can provide this infrastructure. And this is important, let's say, leverage in communication with public bodies, because they tend to understand in the last 15 years that we are likely to collaborate, but also we can fight. And we can sustain in fighting for 5 or 10 years. Half of us will be killed, but, you know, they will have a large problem with this, that it goes beyond the immediate culture needs, so that it will grow into something that is not only this, let's say, for the wider from the political perspective, wider and wider social understanding, unimportant business. You know, so we have to, you know, and that is how it is. So the second layer was this of understanding that the public framework for culture, although is sometimes rotten or corrupt or privatized in a way of not formally privatized, but with clientelistic networks and, you know, all the same people and stuff like that. So understanding that the public framework is important existentially and conceptually important for development of also these infrastructurally or financially or whatever programmatic type of development of also independent scene. So that was one of the important layer, and it was helpful because of the 2008 crisis and all these developments. It was helpful because a lot of critical thinking were about, the whole process of neoliberalization and stuff like that, and the understanding of why it's important to protect public institutions, like that we have Ministry of Culture, that we have public institutions, that we have public theaters and stuff like that, that this is something what is of a crucial importance for us as a society. That would be a wider general understanding of things, but that otherwise we probably as a small country won't have this culture if it will be only turned to the private initiative. So, and on the other side, that this will provide resources also for development of independent scene. So as a part, because if there is no public institutions, it's not that the independent will grow. So the third thing is what is about to come, I think, as an understanding of through this development of civil public presumption of development is that this shouldn't be kind of group takeover of some infrastructure in all of these locations, or what. So it's not the understanding of the civic associations as agents of civil society is important, but it is not replacement for the civil society, because sometimes NGOs tend to represent themselves as a civil society. It is only organized civil society. And what is with the society is the crucial thing in respect to these resources. And in that sense, each of these resources and these, let's say, civic public situations should provide a good argument, transparent models and criteria for opening of these spaces. Otherwise, we have another problem. So being critical on the public institutions and then having a situation where a group of even less transparent, let's say, situation, organizations, whatever, because it shouldn't be more transparent, like NGOs have certain level of transparency, but it is not required in a way that public institutions are. So, and it is a small group of people usually and stuff like that. So when you group these organizations and when they get the huge resource, let's say that it is huge, hopefully, and then the whole issue is who is out of usage of these resources. So, of course, you need a programmatic, let's say, profile of it, or you declare the understanding or what you will do with this. So it is not that there should be some kind of network of unified type of civil public type of like Pogon or whatever type of partnerships, formalized or less formalized, that there is some kind of, let's say, recipe for, what is civil public partnership. So in that sense, in each of these locations or new one that will appear, as for them to deliver this specificity and this profile of this type of resource use. But the crucial thing is how this could be used on a public, let's say, public criteria. That it is not only, group of organizations that are very important. Maybe all the organizations in some city or town will be included in this, but the whole point is not of only group usage of infrastructure. Then we made a bad direction of instituting the relation between public and because this is then dissolving the public level. But I see this as an advancement of a public understanding of usage of resources, not decreasing it, because it could be decreased in a various clientelistic way. In a small towns, you can have mayor with the family established NGOs, and then they make a civil public partnership. So in that sense, we have to think also about what could go wrong with the whole thing, and what is naturally, because when somebody has a power of handling resources, it might happen naturally that it tend to close it in a way. So, there is some criteria of usage. If there is a need that is overwhelming need for the resources, then you need a criteria. But definitely the understanding of these resources as advanced public resources is crucial. If we go into logic of group privatization, then we fail. And in that sense, the financial schemes are important that will be developed in future are important to avoid this type of problem. The second layer of the problem is if we turn this into only a project logic. So to turn the whole thing into, okay, public institution, whatever, or a small city or whatever, establish a civil public partnership on a project level. That means, okay, we will do something for, until we have money, and then we'll see. So in that sense, this should be kind of what is the next step. Would be some kind of not normization about what is civil public partnership, but what are the minimal requirement of number of organization or whatever that is important to provide this plurality and openness of the whole process. And in that sense, there are huge danger of faking the whole thing in a way that public institutions, who usually tend to deal with the civic initiatives in a very bad manner, in providing the content from them, and then representing this as their program. So there is no real kind of partnership in this, and it shouldn't be allowed that these then so-called partnership end up in a new domination with the resources by those who already have the resources. So we should bring more investment into those who are pushing the collaboration. Not many public institutions are interested in opening their doors. They open in a programmatic way, like, but okay, curatorial, okay, you come and you present something. But in a governance, on a governance level, this is problematic. On the new layer, it would be interesting to see existing culture centers opening the governance in a more participative way, that it is not only a kind of instance of a unimportant political management, putting people in the governance bodies there who are not usually not interested at all in the matter. So kind of revitalizing the existing culture centers in a more participative and opening the governance model for this would be maybe some kind of advanced situation.
Thank you. You opened several questions. One of these questions was what could go wrong with the concept of public civil partnership, and that's why we have Irena here to give us a more economics perspective on the concept of public civil partnership, and what are the problems and challenges of making that model sustainable. Please, Irena.
Thank you. I would like to give a few facts. Probably some of you are familiar more or less with the study on cultural and creative industries in Croatia. Some of you probably did not hear for that, but these facts are quite interesting for me as an economist, and to show the importance of cultural sector for the economy of Croatia and growth. In the European Union, there is around 7 million people working in cultural sector. This number is not something to neglect and to think about the future of this sector. Also in Croatia, in the recent years, there is a growth of employment in cultural and creative industries, and today it contributes in Croatia with 2.3% in GDP. There is around 125,000 employed persons either directly in this sector or indirectly, which is also again the number that should be thought of in terms of future measures related to economic and of course social development and other aspects of development. Also, although as economists we like to see the production and the numbers, figures showing that we produced that much products and goods, I would like also to emphasize that if you compare the gross added value of this sector, let's say compared to textile industry or food, wood processing and furniture, rubber and plastic, it's still bigger. This percent is bigger than the production in other sectors that I mentioned. So also in 2014, something more than 600 million euros of gross value added is also produced in this sector. So these are the figures that, of course, show some respectable results, and I see them as the good signs. Also, when you see the structure of the education structure of the people employed there, they usually have the minimum tertiary education. So we speak about educated and highly educated people. When we take a look at the figures related to the shares of men and women, a little bit more men are employed in this sector than women. This may be also, although this correlation is not statistically proven, but maybe it also has to do with the fact that contractual arrangements in this sector are not typical as compared to other sectors. You will find much more service contracts and authors contracts. Probably men are a bit more prone to risk taking than women, and women maybe tend to have more safe, more secure contracts in a longer period. So, as I said, this is not statistically proven, but we can think also in that way. When we also take a look on positions that the people in cultural and creative industries take, it's usually managerial positions, which is also interesting to see. And also they tend much more often to be employed in private sector than in public sector. So altogether, when you see these data, these are facts, and the basis for data analysis was the Croatian national classification of business activities. We have 12 domains within cultural sector, like museums, libraries, arts, music, and so on. When you take a look on all of that, you see that actually there is a big entrepreneurial potential. This potential is still not fully exploited. So from the economic point of view, I see here a lot of possibilities to exploit more this potential. These measures could be especially targeted to self-employment, so as they tend to be self-employed more than employed. Also, there could be measures or stimulation of employment for already existing firms, extra employment of those who work in creative and cultural industries, and also education programs could be further elaborated and offered to get more educated people in this sector. As I said, these are few figures that might shed some light on the economic contribution, so contribution to the economic growth in Croatia. What I would like to also relate this discussion to is recently, we, Croatian government and the Croatian parliament, adopted a strategy on regional development of the Republic of Croatia. I don't know if any person from here participated in any of the workshops carried out during the 6 to 8 month period. I worked on that strategy as one of the key experts in regional development. What I wanted to emphasize there, and I find it as a good example of participatory, at least planning, and hopefully participatory governing at a later stage once when the action plan will be adopted, which we hope it will be soon. So we targeted 4 big sectors: economy, social development, environment and space and environment, and institutions. And within this social development, there were representatives of the culture institutions or cultural sector, including the Ministry of Culture and the various institutions related in different ways. And we invited them to this process at the very beginning. So in the first round of the interviews, we interviewed 27 ministries, agencies, bodies of state administration, and involve them in the process of planning the strategy of regional development. We wanted to have them already at the beginning, because many times they get the documents already at the stage when the document is almost about to be adopted. So they had an opportunity to intervene already at the beginning. Then through the phase of the analysis and producing SWOT analysis, then in the phase of setting up the strategic objectives of the strategy, priorities and measures. So there was at least a number, 5 to 6 opportunities where the representatives of cultural institutions could get themselves and could provide a lot of comments and a lot of contributions in this area. In the end, this strategy is built on 3 strategic objectives. The first is related to the quality of life and improvement of local and regional infrastructure. The second is related to the increase of competitiveness, regional competitiveness and employment. Particularly in this second strategic objective, there are 2 measures. One measure is activation of state properties called brownfields, where is especially targeted to activate these properties through cultural and creative industries, one of the possible ways to activate them, and with cooperation with organizations of civil society. So this strategy recognized the strength of the civil society and the creative and cultural industries in the process of the further development of Croatia. And there is another measure that is related to elaboration of the programs of cultural heritage, also recognized by the Ministry of Culture. So the Ministry of Regional Development and the European funds is actually the coordinator of a number of activities between various ministries, but the Ministry of Culture and relevant bodies were there, and they had their chance to put the ideas and formulate the measures to boost the growth of culture and possibly some new modes of culture innovations. That is somehow I see as a good example where the culture can be one of the drivers of the economic development, and especially in areas where the support from the national level is needed. So particular measures will be further elaborated through activities, programs and projects in the action plan. And I believe there is really room for this cooperation between civil and public sector. Also, maybe to mention that at this stage, only a month ago, the process of the elaboration of national development strategy, the first time in Croatia in 27 years that we are developing really the national development strategy until 2030. This process is also envisaged to be participatory, and the colleagues from the same Ministry of Regional Development targeted also one of the area is the culture, and they conducted, or they are in the course on conduction of 8 workshops around Croatia, inviting the representatives of cultural sector to provide their inputs and to provide ideas on vision of Croatia until 2030. So let's hope that also there will be cultural dimension in that vision recognized.
Thank you, Irena, for your comment. The idea behind this panel is to create a dialogue between our researchers and contributors. So I will first, before I give mic to the audience, of course, I'll first ask someone from our researchers to comment, or if they have a comment. Okay, Anna. Oh, the one, that's one.
Well, just to briefly situate and position our project yet again, this panel started with the 1970s socialism and ended up with the creative industries in 2017. But because there are these two obvious vertical and horizontal axes that were now sort of given, I just wanted to briefly comment the 1970s great sort of atmosphere towards culture and investment in culture was not only a socialist legacy. It wasn't a socialist situation. It was then global situation, especially in the European South, where 1970s and 1980s were times of a rapid proliferation of decentralization of cultural policies in Italy, in France, in Spain, of like really strong culture development on a European level. And Yugoslavia and the socialist movement were following the trends, as we are following trends now, even with this. But also from that time to today, we've had some really profound transformations. The new democracies in Latin America, new democracies in Africa, even us as a new democracy. I mean, yesterday we had a panel on culture democracy where a person from South Africa was discussing cultural democracy with a person from Finland. Like, talking about the same thing and having similar issues about this topic. So I think it's always wise when we talk about, even before we open to discussion with the public, to open our horizon more horizontally and to see how it fits, especially now in over-globalized world, in a much, much, much wider context, even going back to the creative industries. Croatians are now counting how much BDP, how many jobs, how many this, where the forefathers of such logic are abandoning it and going back. So we all know that the Creative Cities project is now, failed, if I can say so. That the creative economy left really suspectful sort of effects on the cultural sector and its development overall. We have all the theorists, predominantly coming from the UK, now going back and saying that maybe it was the right approach to take, to blur the boundaries between culture and economy, making culture yet another asset of the economy. So what I'm trying to say, all of these are little puzzles along the way that will be really, obviously, durational and processual. Going back to Italy, and we spoke about this on Monday, they started with profound shifts in their system, which wasn't just culture system, but overall political and social system. And today we find the best examples of social cultural centers and participatory governance in Italy, but this is 40 years later on. That's all I needed to say. Thank you very much.
Yes, I would like to politely disagree with what you are saying. As it regards 1970 situation in the former Yugoslavia, which was one, not only following trends, this is simply not true, and second, there was a host of site-specific reasons, which the professor mentioned, which made the situation look like it was fighting against nationalism, which was not the agenda in some of the countries which invested generously into culture, like in Italy. It was not the issue. And there were a number of other things that were site-specific and not really. And the second thing I would like to say is that it's actually speaking about my city, for example. In its whole history, the city of Split was peripheral. In the 90s, it became provincial. And this is a huge difference. Croatian policy in the 90s became provincial, not peripheral in relation to world events and so on, but very provincial, meaning copying the models imported from outside without digesting them even. And this thing with creative industries is one of the obvious examples. So we are much more backward now than we used to be in the 70s. Just this point I wanted to make.
Thank you. Now it's time to open to the audience for questions, comments. I would like you to raise your hands if you have any questions. Yes, please, I will give you a mic. I have plenty of mics there.
Well, this is more about just information comment. My name is Viktor Koska, and I'm a senior expert advisor from the Government's Office for Cooperation with NGOs from the Republic of Croatia. I would like to thank all the panelists on the very informative and very useful information, as I'm also coming from the academic community. I worked for the faculty a couple of months ago, so I can actually commend all the speeches, because this is like what actually policy relevant research looks like. I can see it now because we are actually working on a couple of the projects that are strongly correlated to the topic of today's panel. And I would like to inform that, as Theo mentioned, that framework for developing the participation in the long term is more important than the short term emphasis. I would like to say that we are already working in the government's office on establishing this kind of cooperation with NGOs. I'm happy to say that we have also in our ongoing national strategy for the development of enabling environment for civil society to implementation activities which are strongly promoting the participation of the NGOs in the civil society, and that we are also foreseeing the new application funded from the European structural funds for exactly funding the projects in the line of what your ideas were presented today. So I would just like to make the open call to receive some feedback, if it's possible to receive from you also your today's presentation, which might be very useful for setting the good call for community-centered developments in the coming months. So thank you very much on your presentations, and also thank you, Davidovich, for inviting us. It was an honor to be here today.
More comments or questions? Yes?
Ja sam Denis Kirinčić. Udruga sam, znači NGO. Mislim, nisam ja udruga, nego vodim. Predsjednica sam udruge Kazališna radionica Malik Rijeka. Dobro se znam sa Davorom Miškovićem, zato što smo radili jako puno projekata zajedno i od samog početka ovih izlaganja želim postaviti pitanje. Oprostite što pričam na hrvatskom, govorim na hrvatskom. Znači svaki puta kada je netko od vas izlagao, ja sam imala potrebu postaviti pitanje vezano za praksu kojom se bavim. Znači bavim se kazališnom umjetnošću djece i mladih u Rijeci i za djecu i mlade. I sad tu ima jako puno problema u Rijeci, ne znam kako je drugdje, pa bih postavila ipak Davoru Miškoviću pitanje, pošto sam najsigurnija da ćeš ti dati neki odgovor koji ću ja razumjeti. Željela bi pitati da li uočavaš manipulaciju visokom kulturom, kazališnom kulturom za djecu i mlade i sa djecom i mladima u Rijeci, znači govorimo o Rijeci, na način da je kazališna umjetnost djece i mladih i kazalište za djecu i mlade kojeg Rijeka nema, znači kazališna umjetnost djece i mladih postala sredstvo manipulacije vlasti da bi se došlo do novaca. A to kulminira ove godine. Znači, po meni, nakon što je Rijeka dobila titulu Europske prijestolnice kulture. Ja ne znam da li ti to uočavaš, ali meni Nešto što se promijenilo, recimo. Znači, ja sam prije 3-4 godine pratila sva kulturna događanja u gradu Rijeci. Odlazila sam u Zagreb kad sam mogla, gostovala sam sa profesionalno vođenim kazališnim predstavama u Sloveniji, u Pionirskom kazalištu, pri Slovenskom mladinskom gledališću, u Puli, INK Pula, u HNK Varaždin, u Splitu nismo nikada bili. Bili smo gosti Međunarodnog dječjeg festivala u Šibeniku, 3 godine za redom. Mislim, promijenilo se to da ja više ne idem nigdje van u Rijeci, niti na jedno kulturno događanje, jer se kvaliteta toliko spustila. Svako radi sa djecom i mladima i rade se svakakve predstave za djecu i mlade i dovode se svakakve predstave za djecu i mlade. Znači, tu je nivo pao za -100. Evo. Hvala.
We will take a few questions or comments now, translate the question, and Davor will respond to it.
So should I answer a question?
Okay. Then translate a bit and answer if it's okay with you.
Yeah, maybe probably I think that people will understand.
Okay, yeah,
from
it's
the
local.
answer
It's
what
local.
was the question
issue.
was related to what? To unrelated topic, but it concerns to kind of overall cultural policy in the city, and especially towards the youth theater. And I could give you just briefly answer is that what I observe in the city is that you are kind of victim of the very kind of new programs that are developed in the city in which you are not included. One is Croatian National Theatre and another is ECOC. What? Should I?
I'm just on the chair.
Mogu ti poslije odgovoriti, ali evo, znači da ponovim na hrvatskom.
Yeah, but that's not the topic of this, I think, panel. So we can talk about this later.
I gave you an
and we have
answer,
a statement in
now we
English.
are
I think
going
it's
off
quite
the topic.
enough for this part of the for this kind of question. So we don't have a lot of time. Anna, if you want to.
No.
Okay,
I was
sorry.
just picking up the mic.
Okay, but I just have a comment. It's opened a bit a topic of the youth and youth culture, and thinking about. And Professor opened the issue of new technologies and how it's somehow influenced the political process. From thinking about the new technologies and today's children preoccupation with new technologies and all the aspects of it, how the programs and of these new cultural centers, new institutions could grasp this problem, how they should be somehow developed in terms that there will be open for children that are functioning in cultural sense in completely different stories than we functioned today or later or before that in the 70s and 80s when all these old cultural institutions were developed in Croatia or in Yugoslavia in that term. So.
Okay. Oh, all right. Well, I can speak about this, but this is an issue aside of the whole array of so important issues. But you are right. Problem with children who work with new technologies and who transform their behavior, their linguistic competences by deteriorating them is a kind of not only pedagogical but also social and cultural problem which we have to deal with on behalf of the future generations. It is that, it is something which has been observed by some German experts 10 to 15 years ago, that children who are too much with virtual reality cannot grasp reality and multi-layered reality as such, and then cannot communicate, and also they are emotionally handicapped. So teachers in schools, pedagogues, and experts for this kind of problem, they have to work with children at least two days after weekend in order to recover them, to put them back into reality in order to continue the learning process in the school. Well, that's for one. For two, of course, this is one dimension of the vision of reality, which is heavily burdened with the pictorial, visual perception and other ones. Well, there is something wrong with this, not with children, but the way they consume this the content providers' content products, which is that they don't see the background. We had that problem with our students in the first years of the BA study. You know, they cannot understand the context of what is what was talking about, what was the topic, and then they cannot at all understand the why we use the abstract concepts or concepts as such. So this might be the consequence, not only this, of course, but might be the consequence of this facing with new technology, which somehow takes part of your brain memory simply by washing it. I mean, by pushing it too much of pictures of information which are superficial, which brain cannot digest, you know, because that young brain has no network which we call concepts for, you know, organizing what he or she sees, and to understand the message. And such a generation is unfortunately very often the victim of propaganda, which I of course mentioned at the end of my intervention as regards the growth of populism in the United States, but similarly in Croatia and other countries. Yeah. Well, this is a kind of you know, the kind of behavior which is very much fitting into the into the pattern of plebiscitary democracy. Yes, no, yes, no. I like it, I dislike it. Well, this is the end of communication, you know, not the beginning of communication.
You had a comment.
I'd like to...
Please, the orange one that's not working.
Once again, because I made it something. No. Try to speak on it.
Da? Okay. Okay, so topic of culture industries versus socially engaged culture, like a social culture center. That implies that there is some kind of sociality or engagement, and on the other side, the notion of autonomy of culture and artistic production and stuff like that. I would, and all those of project type of employment, European Social Fund, all these interaction between different pragmatic interests that are structural somehow for today's situation is somehow important to discuss, because they all somehow want to instrumentalize the culture and artistic production in a way. And when we were pushing the notion of social culture centers, we were not thinking about the kind of production of a new, new man or new entity, new humanity, or, big ideas about enlightened idea of that, what is the goal of this development of socializing the culture. The whole problem somehow in Croatia is that the institutional setup is producing only accidentally the critical positions. Like in 19th century, you have artists who respond to some or criticize or intervene with some social or problem or open up a discussion through the artistic approach. And this is fine, and there is kind of tendency not to do this type of thing because it is not opportunistic to do this within the already established institutions and stuff like that. But it exists. But this is all type of, let's say, intervention between the environment and the subject of culture and artistic production. On the other side, you had this, programmatic position of institutions in 70s or whatever, who were saying we are producing something, like something. We are not producing processes, but we tend to have some kind of goal. What is the ending result of a new humanity or whatever, So in a way, and now we have creative industries that are somehow lacking legitimacy from my point of view after 2008 crisis. And the whole logic of turning everything on a market is highly questionable, and it proven not to be effective in its own proclaimed goals of providing something better, more, or whatever. So in that sense, but this is also instrumentalizing. So we have this project type of employment through social fund. We have this creative industry market. So. But this logic of socially engaged culture and art is not one of these instrumental agenda. This social culture centers should not be one of these, new type of, proclaimed goals for instrumental development of something. It is, I realize this in a way of, let's put in a same environment and produce interactions between those who are dealing with culture, dealing with other issues, sustainable development, protection of public and common goods, all this stuff. Let's make this situation and let's find what will happen with this. So it's not about we need art for social change. Like it was a kind of fashion in Great Britain or whatever, and then everyone should do, like a place for children with disabilities or with social inclusion or stuff like that. So if you program this, then you tend to fail because things are not functioning like that. It is easy to have this type of rationale. When you're sitting in some office or planning a revolution, what should happen, But in a way, this is not the point about dealing with the real stuff on the ground. So we should provide environment, institutional environment, where different actors could critically interact. And not only there, but produce environment for actions toward the society together. So in that sense, they can play a circus, but they can organize, campaign against privatization of local, space or whatever. So in that sense, but maybe it will end that in small places they will play chess. So in that sense, we shouldn't prescribe final outputs of that. And this is the reason why this couldn't be interpreted only through the project goal. So we are experimenting, giving the framework for social culture, artistic interactions, and expect something to happen. So it's not, manageable in a way of final goals and all this stuff.
last one, Sandra.
Thank you. I just wanted to say it was very interesting panel and discussion. And yesterday and today, when you were talking about, I was all the time thinking about the context we are living in, which is very populistic presently, no? And all the mechanisms that we put in place can be somehow misused. So here we were talking about the new scene, the independent scene, the public cultural sector and the private cultural sector. And somehow I am saying that a lot. I think the most important thing in a system is a default system. So we are now changing a little bit on a fringe.
Sorry, what did you say was the most important?
The default position. So what is the mainstream thing? So this is, I think, where the change is necessary. We talked about our strategies and analysis of culture policies, but our biggest problem is that we don't have one even today. And this is the thing. We should not only be talking about participatory governments, which is, of course, topic of this conference, but maybe to the most talk about more old-fashioned concept of good governance, because public cultural sector has constraints in what they can do and how they have to do it. So they cannot necessarily be open so they can of course open their door, what Teodor said, for curatorial and programming, but the way they are governed is different. And this is what I think is the biggest problem, that all the time after the socialist era, in all these decades, we have not done the reform. So if we are still civil servant, we cannot, in institutions, easily hire any new people, not fire anybody. So this does not allow for mobility, this does not allow for a new cooperation, easy cooperation. And this is what I think is the most important thing, that we should all try to focus with all the three sectors, to try to contribute to proposal of some new default system that would not have this artificial division in between public, private NGOs. In Europe, you have, if you have taken maybe notice, there is this thing which is called operational foundations. So it is a private body, so private law, but doing the public service. This is what we would like to preserve, the public value of culture, to make sure that it is accessible widely. And this is, I think, one very difficult transition, because we have only negative experiences in all these years, that when the reform is done is usually not necessarily for the better. But I think that we are going to move forward when we manage to move our default system to the level that is empowering all the stakeholders in it, with either private, either public, let's say, or the newcomers that are now being recognized as a civil sector. Thank you.
And I will give opportunity to our participants to react on that, and that will be the last part of our session. If you have any reactions, yeah, please.
The wrong one. Okay, not particularly to have the comment, but a few comments more. In theory, optimum is the best situation, the level where everybody is satisfied. Normally, in real world, we tend to have at least suboptimum, and that is that we are all unequally satisfied. So this is like the position where we usually come up in the end. When I take a look at Croatia, and when I take the figures, this famous development index shows so much differences between Croatian counties. So I hardly believe that at the national level it will be possible to have the policy that could target in the same way a county like Međimurje County and Lika-Sen County. Do you really believe that it's possible to set up the system that could satisfy all the needs? That's why I believe we have to be open to frame the conditions that would allow them to grow in a way that is the best appropriate for them. So also support to raising the culture and the issues related to the culture also depends on the infrastructure. So from the economic point of view, it's not the same supporting to maintenance of some big facilities in one county compared to another county. What I also would like to believe that at least at the strategic level, this field is to a certain extent recognized. And although many strategies in Croatia are actually not implemented or they are implemented partially, there are these county development strategies. Each of these strategies has at least tackled the issue on cooperation between civil and public sector, and as far as I saw by now, at least generally, there is room for cooperation. Sometimes there is the thing that is missing is the leadership from the regional and local level, but sometimes there is an initiative from the civil sector, but it's unfortunately not recognized enough at the local and regional level. And this is the room where a lot of things could be done.
Thank you. We are out of time. Thank you for attendance of this panel. The next panel is in 4:30 called New Horizons of Public Culture. Which type of institutional practice do we need? Thank you.